The most powerful CEO in tech isn't the one making headlines or stirring up controversy on social media. It's the quiet one who transformed Steve Jobs' reality distortion field into something far more subtle and dangerous.
That's such an interesting take on Tim Cook. Most people still think of Apple as Steve Jobs' company, don't they?
Well, here's what makes this so fascinating. When Jobs passed away in 2011, Apple was worth about $350 billion. Today, under Cook's leadership, it's worth over $3 trillion. But the real story isn't in the numbers, it's in how he achieved this through completely rewriting Jobs' psychological playbook.
So instead of trying to fill those famous black turtlenecks, he went in a totally different direction?
Exactly. And this is where it gets really interesting. Jobs was known for what Apple employees call the reality distortion field, this almost supernatural ability to convince people that the impossible was not just possible but inevitable. Cook looked at that and thought, what if we could institutionalize this power?
You know, I've noticed that about Apple's presentations now. They're so measured, almost hypnotic in their calmness.
That's exactly what I'm talking about. Under Jobs, Apple keynotes were like rock concerts. Under Cook, they're more like carefully choreographed ballet performances. Every movement, every word is precisely calculated to project this sense of absolute certainty.
So how does this actually translate into business success? I mean, the numbers you mentioned are staggering.
Well, let me give you a concrete example. When Facebook faced the Cambridge Analytica scandal, Zuckerberg was everywhere, apologizing and explaining. When Apple faces criticism about, say, App Store policies, Cook might release one carefully worded statement and then silence.
That's fascinating. So the silence itself becomes a form of power.
Precisely, and here's why it works. In a world of constant noise and drama, especially in tech, that kind of calm becomes almost hypnotic. Every time Elon Musk tweets something controversial or Mark Zuckerberg has to testify before Congress, Cook's silence makes Apple look more stable, more trustworthy.
That must require incredible discipline, though, to maintain that kind of calm presence consistently across an entire organization.
And that's where Cook's real genius shows through. He's turned that personal discipline into corporate culture. Look at how Apple handles product launches now. They don't need Jobs-style one more thing moments anymore. They just release things with this quiet confidence that suggests, of course, this is the next logical step in technology.
It's almost like they're not even competing anymore. They're just defining what comes next.
You know what's really telling? In the last 5 years, Apple has faced multiple potential crises, privacy concerns, labor issues, antitrust investigations. But can you remember any specific controversy? They've mastered the art of making problems feel less significant simply by remaining unruffled.
That's making me think about their whole ecosystem differently. Even their stores have that same calm, almost temple-like atmosphere.
Right? And it's all part of this larger psychological strategy. Under Jobs, Apple was a revolution. Under Cook, it's become more like a force of nature, something that feels permanent, inevitable, almost beyond questioning.
But doesn't this kind of subtle manipulation make you a bit uncomfortable? We're talking about enormous influence over how people think and behave.
That's such an important point to consider. What Cook has created is arguably more powerful than what Jobs built, because it's less visible. Think about it. When someone's trying to convince you of something, you naturally put up defenses. But when they act like something's already decided, that bypasses our critical thinking entirely.
How do you think this affects innovation at Apple? Does this calmer approach make them less likely to take big risks?
Well, here's what's fascinating about that. They've actually redefined what innovation means. Under Jobs, innovation was about dramatic leaps forward. Under Cook, it's about careful iteration and ecosystem building. They've made stability itself feel innovative.
That's such a clever reframing of what progress looks like.
And consider this. Apple services revenue alone is now larger than Netflix and Disney streaming businesses combined. That's not because of revolutionary new products, but because Cook understood that in the long game, steady expansion beats dramatic disruption.
So in a way, only a company with Apple's level of established success could even attempt this strategy.
Exactly. And here's another layer to consider. Cook's approach works because Apple already had decades of Jobs-era mystique to build on. They had earned the right to be quiet, if you will. It's like they're operating from a position of such strength that they don't need to prove anything anymore.
That's really making me think about how power works in the modern corporate world.
And that might be the most important lesson here. In today's world, true power often lies not in the ability to disrupt or shock, but in the ability to make your version of reality feel so natural that people forget it's constructed. Cook didn't just inherit Apple's reality distortion field, he evolved it into something more subtle and possibly more powerful.
Do you think this approach will continue to work as new challenges emerge?
That's the real test, isn't it? As we move into an era of AI and augmented reality, maintaining that calm authority will become increasingly challenging. But if there's one thing Cook has proven, it's that sometimes the quietest voice in the room is actually the most dangerous.
Well, I'll definitely never look at an Apple keynote the same way again.
And maybe that awareness is exactly what we need. Because in today's world, understanding these subtle forms of influence isn't just interesting. It's essential for anyone who wants to understand how power really works in the modern age.